season for 2024. So now we're going to look at the 2024 wet season. Now, generally, we've been seeing the very hot conditions in the globe from 2023, and that has continued through 2024. So this is going to have an impact on what we're expecting in terms of our wet season. Starting with the temperatures, because of that continual factor that it will play on our forecasts. So generally, the wet season temperatures are warmer than the dry season temperatures, which may not be good news for those who've been looking through the heat recently. This wet season temperature outlook is favored to be warmer than average across all of Trinidad and Tobago. There's a 40 to 65% chance for maximum day temperatures and minimum night temperatures to be above normal. This excessive heat season usually peaks during August to October, with September being the warmest wet season month. So I'm going to show you here about the excessive heat outlook, and we've pointed out a few of the key areas that you should be looking at. So the chances for elevated maximum temperatures to reach or exceed 34 degrees Celsius during the season, and the chances are highest during the months of late August and early October, and also we could be seeing the development of hot spells. Chances for the elevated or these short duration hot spells, which are basically developing over a period, is also heightened. Just for clarification, the definition of a hot spell is 5 consecutive hot days, and a hot day is with a maximum temperature of 34 degrees Celsius or above. But even though we are likely to see those 5 hot day spells, we cannot rule out those 3-day hot surges as well. And you could also see those temperatures again reaching or exceeding 34 degrees Celsius. So we've talked about the temperatures. We're now going to look at the rainfall, because this is one of the key components of our wet season. And the Met Office is predicting wetter than usual start to the wet season, with above average rainfall totals having the best chance of occurring at this time. So in June, the outlook suggests a 42 to 63% chance for above normal rainfall for western areas of Trinidad and eastern Tobago to be wetter than usual, with other areas near normal. You can see there the intense blue colors, creating those western areas of Tobago down towards the southwest coast, up towards Tobago as well. You can see up towards eastern Tobago, Roxburgh, Speyside, and in the northern range, where we see above normal rainfall totals. So the first half of our wet season, for June to August of 2024 as a whole, is likely to be near normal to above normal. So wetter than usual conditions are expected in western Trinidad and most of Tobago. And notice that those intense blue colors here are showing you where you're likely to see the above normal conditions, at least for the first half. That includes June to August. Now, usually we would present the second half of our wet season forecast at this time, but what we decided to do this year is to break it up into 3-month rolling periods. This will give you a better evolution of how the wet season, show you how the wet season will better evolve as we go through the next few months. So the 3-month period, which is June to August, we said is likely to get near normal to above rainfall totals, and lesser so for August to October, with September to November figured to be as wet as usual. So the months of June, August, and November are likely to be the wettest months of the 2024 wet season. And you notice that those are, again, the blue colors. They do tend to get smaller in area as we get towards September to November. But just bearing in mind that near normal rainfall for November is where we tend to see our secondary peak in rainfall. So November, we often see flooding, even though it's near normal. The accumulation of water that we'll be seeing from August going through into October and into November could heighten the risk of flooding here. So now we're looking at the entire wet season rainfall. So you notice that it's going to be as wet as usual, but there will be large pockets of wetter than usual conditions in the north and the southern coastal areas of Trinidad. So this is something to bear in mind, simply because of, even though we are expecting that near normal to above normal only in pockets, the likelihood of flooding still remains heightened. Now, in terms of the long-term average, you may be asking how much of the wet season rainfall that we're expecting this year compares to the long-term, what we normally see. So when we consider near normal, we look at between 75 to 125% of the long-term average. And we look in terms of our expected rainfall, this compares with the average that favors the highest percent of average totals to range between 91 to 136%. So again, we are keeping within that near normal threshold for the most part, but again, does not rule out the fact that we've seen some of these heavier pockets of rainfall. So for the water, drainage, agriculture, and other sectors, this next slide is of importance to you. We're talking about the total volumes of rainfall that are expected. Now, it is likely that the rainfall volumes will range between about 1,000 millimeters in the leeward side of Tobago and the areas along the southwest coast of Trinidad. And it will be closer to 2,560 millimeters in northeast Trinidad and in the vicinity of North Orocrouche, Sandy Grande, the Orocrouche, Hermitage, and environs. Also in the Tobago, areas such as Mount St. George and Goodwood can expect close to 2,000 millimeters of rainfall. So again, we notice that for those within the construction sector, etc., for drainage, agriculture, and water authorities, these totals do represent rainfall amounts that we are likely to see, but there will be occasional areas in which maybe is slightly higher than what we have. But that is exactly what, for the most part, we'll be seeing for the wet season. Now, one of the major issues for the wet season is that we can generate flooding, and one of the factors that we look at the Met Office are the monthly and the daily rainfall that can exceed certain threshold values, which can increase the flooding as well as the hazardous impacts. Now, two of the fixed threshold indicators that we believe are important, particularly to disaster and emergency decision making here in Trinidad and Tobago, is the monthly rainfall that exceeds 250 millimeters across large areas, and excessive daily rainfall in the form of 24-hour rainfall that exceeds 25 millimeters. Also, two other duration indicators that we use are the 3-day and the 5-day wet spells, which historically have been the cause of most of the high impact flood events in recent years. So we have assessed those indicators, and looking at what is likely to happen, the probability of exceeding 250 millimeters of rainfall during the month of June 2024 between 13 to 93% of reaching or exceeding that value, and this is more than the average for the month in most areas. So this outlook shows that Sandy Grande and environs have the highest chance for rainfall to exceed 250 millimeters in June, and this increases the likelihood of flood events in those areas. We also looked at the probabilities for August. You can see here that we have a 10 to 82% chance of a rainfall for exceeding 250 millimeters for the month of August. And again, this is favoring those eastern areas of Trinidad, most part, again around the Sandy Grande and environs. What is significant here is that you notice the location of the reservoirs of Trinidad. We do have the blue covering most of the reservoir areas, so we should be getting that rainfall impacting and raising those levels as we go through the next few months, particularly through August. We are now going to go through to November, which again is the secondary peak of our wet season, and probabilities here of exceeding 250 millimeters around 7 to 90% for November's rainfall. So this will again be the highest chances of occurring are in northeast Trinidad, which is also, I suppose, good news for the water managers in the audience. We should be seeing some of that recovery as we go through the next few months. Normally, we tend to look at the excessive rainfall as well. And this is something that, in terms of what intensity we can get during shorter periods. So, a rainfall day, when we get, let's say, 25 millimeters or above, we consider that a heavy rainfall day. And when we get over 50 millimeters, we consider it to be extremely heavy. So there's a 52% chance for above normal number of heavy rainfall days that is exceeding 25 millimeters. We normally get about 16 of those heavy rainfall days. This year we're forecasting between 11 and 22 of those days. So that's a slightly higher than we have normally. And also there's a 43% chance of above normal extremely heavy rainfall days. That is a rainfall exceeding 50 millimeters within the day. And one other factor that we also looked at within the category of above 50 millimeters is the fact of looking at a rainfall of 75 millimeters or above. We are expecting that there could be 2 or 6 extremely heavy rainfall days of at least 5 likely to produce 75 millimeters of rainfall. Normally, we get about 4 of those such days, so it's just 1 day higher at 5, but again, the possibility of these types of rainfall events causing flooding is there, and this is the reason for the inclusion for these outlooks. Now, once we get those heavy rainfall occurring, particularly on a daily scale, we have to now look at how we spread this over 3 and 5 days, because it's the continuation of rainfall over consecutive days that tends to lead to those prolonged and severe flood events. Now, there's a 53% chance of above normal number of 3 consecutive days with rainfall above 10 millimeters. Normally, we're expecting about 5. We normally get about 4. And during the 2024 wet season, we're likely to have about 49 wet days, which is about 10 millimeters or more. And we normally get about 47. So we will be seeing wet days continuing through this wet season. And again, we're looking at the likelihood of there being a 73% chance for 5 consecutive days of rainfall where you can see over 10 millimeters or more. One of the major things that we've been looking at over the last few years is the influence of the amount of rainfall that causes flooding. And we've looked at the flood indicators there. We've looked at the 3 and 5 day spells that we could get. We've also looked at the possibilities of us seeing over 50 millimeters or over 75 millimeters. But this will now lead us into what the flood risk is for the 2024 wet season. So the rainfall outlook suggests, for the most part, a wet season that is likely to be wet as usual, with some areas being wetter than usual. It also suggests that the first half of the wet season, particularly June, August, and November, have reasonably good probabilities of rainfall exceeding 250 millimeters, which is more than average in some areas that historically have experienced flooding with such monthly totals. The number of heavy rainfall days are also forecasted to be higher than average. And if I am to basically encapsulate what this wet season will be in terms of 2 words, both the hurricane and wet season, is that we're likely to see a volatile and erratic hurricane season, and also to see a heightened risk of flooding during this wet season. So even though we are looking for near normal conditions, at least towards back end of our wet season, the accumulation of rainfall at the front end of our wet season could be a major factor as we go through the next few months. So this is our flood risk. Again, it exists nationwide, but it will be higher than normal across those well-known floodplain areas, which is of a northwest, as well as the southern areas of Trinidad and that northeast corner of Trinidad, as well as in the Tobago. There'll be a moderately higher than normal flood potential in northeast Trinidad, that is near Valencia, San Grande, which includes Vega de Ropuch, Fishing Pond, San Grande, San Luchito, and environs, northern and northwestern areas of St. Augustine, St. Joseph, Piarco, Port of Spain, and Diego Martin. And similar elevated potentials exist in the South Oruch River Basin, Pinal, Debe, and Moruga. Now, the flood potentials are moderately higher than normal for St. Helena, Caroni and environs, Pomitan and environs, and parts of Manzanilla. And Tobago will experience moderately higher than usual flood potential in the northeastern and southwestern areas, such as Charlottesville, Speyside, Delaford, Mount St. George, Crown Point, and environs. We've taken some time to highlight the flood risk here and those particular areas for the local communities, for the disaster risk managers, for those first responders. Those areas which you have highlighted are not exclusive, but this is where we favor the highest potential for flooding. But as we said, flood risk can exist nationwide, particularly with the enhanced risk of us seeing those heavy bouts of rainfall. So, in closing, we have a few messages here. It's going to be a volatile and erratic 2024 Atlantic hurricane season with an enhanced flood risk during the wet season, and the flood potential is moderately higher than normal for known and emerging flood-prone areas. So we're advising all citizens to accelerate their flood preparations, and disaster managers, disaster preparedness, flood alleviating agencies, and emergency responders. You must be proactive and escalate and ramp up your preparations for the wet season. We have come to the end, and thank you very much.